check. Check 1, 2. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Happy Ever After Party. I'm your host, Sam Logsdon. Today, I just wanted to take some time to introduce myself, the show, and the kind of things we're going to be looking at, including the meat and potatoes of our discourse. Just you and me today, get to know each other a little better in a nice, quiet, intimate setting. I've been producing audiobooks since 2016. I have done other work, but at this point, I'm focusing on voice acting and hosting. I'm going to be joined by my lovely friend, Miss Amanda, in the next coming episodes. She works as an editor in a publishing company here in Pittsburgh. We've been friends since high school for decades, eons, millennia, and nothing really brings us closer together than being able to nitpick movies and TV. Between the two of us for our jobs, we read some pretty terrible books. So when we come across terrible writing in movies and TV, we tend to be a little harsher with it, just because we're doing that in our time off. Besides that, both of us are total nerds. I love fairy tales. I love folklore. I love mythology from all over the world. I am a pretty big fan of the Fable series, which I'll get into in a minute here. And somewhere I have some figures from Todd McFarlane Monsters' Twisted Fairy Tales. If I don't have it, my ex does. But I used to have Moffat, Red Riding Hood, and the Frankenstein figures. They were gross and they were horrifying, and I loved all of them. So what exactly are we going to be discussing here at the Happy Ever After Party? Well, pretty much any TV or movies based on fairy tales. We have one focus in particular, but I'm not a huge fan of rules. I don't like restrictions or limitations. So if there's something worth discussing, I'm going to discuss it. The main focus is long, it's episodic, and if we spend too much time discussing it, we're going to go insane. And you do not want to listen to us ramble on and on when we're bored and going insane. So we're going to need plenty of time to discuss other things. There's going to be a lot of talk about Disney. There's going to be a lot of talk about Grimm's fairy tales. More often than not, I'll try to dive into the lore behind the shows. I don't like to assume that everyone knows the fairy tales by heart, and especially I don't like to assume that people know the original tales. A lot of fairy tales are cute, but they're based on gruesome child deaths and Stockholm Syndrome and the hatred of witches, a bunch of fun stuff. So why would I leave any of that out? And sort of talking about cultural references, I want to dive into lore too, because I don't want to make the mistake of criticizing a creative choice rather than something that's actually derived from the original text. Like, I remember in grade school, I was watching this anime called Azumanga Daioh. It's a hilarious show. It's very near and dear to me. For those of you who might not know about it, it's a slice of life comedy anime, and it has a ton of Japanese pop culture references in it. There's an episode that takes place during New Year's Eve. The main character is asleep and is having a dream, and her friend in the dream hurls an eggplant and an eagle into an air while standing on top of Mount Fuji. And at first, I thought this was just dream logic. The show likes to be random for the sake of being random. But after doing some reading and talking with people, I found out that this was supposed to all represent good luck, according to the Japanese on New Year's Eve. If you have a dream about an eagle, an eggplant, Mount Fuji, or some combination of them, it's said to be that you're going to have luck for the rest of the year. So but what that little rant was all about is, when talking about adaptation, I do want to try and separate the lore from creative liberties. Especially with the meat and potatoes of this podcast, I really want to call out the stupid adaptations of fairy tales while also acknowledging some genuinely well thought out nods to original text. At some point, talking about myths and folklore from places other than Europe would be great. This is just the starting point for us now. But if you have any suggestions for shows, movies, reading material based on other kinds of folklore and fairy tales, doesn't matter if it's Asian, African, from indigenous peoples, please, please, please let us know. We want to make this content as approachable and relatable as possible to people. So if you're kind of sick of fairy tales just being boiled down to old folklore from Europe, please give us some new material. We like to keep things fresh. But for now, let's get down to business. For the next few episodes, I want to talk about our main focus, a show that is ambitious in its attempt to modernize mythology, feminize fairy tales, all while paying respects to the mouse that owns ABC. That's right. We are going to be talking about Once Upon a Time. For those of you that don't know, this is a 7-season-long TV show about a small town in Maine that secretly holds a bunch of beloved fairy tale characters. The catch? They don't remember who they are. They all think that they're living in some boring town in Maine, and it isn't until a woman from out of town shows up that memories start coming back. I can easily put this show in with Murder, She Wrote and the works of Stephen King for the list of reasons I won't go to Maine. The lobster's tempting, but I'm going to forgo the seafood out of self-preservation. Like, between Regina and Pennywise and the entire town of Cabot Cove, I'm fine staying in Pittsburgh. Before I actually sit down with Amanda and watch the first episode, I wanted to look into the show's production and some of its biggest critiques. Full disclosure, I've tried watching the show before and Amanda has not. I made it until Neverland. And if you go on our Twitter or our website, I posted a GIF of the exact moment I turned off Netflix and decided that the show completely lost me. It wasn't a quote. It wasn't anything dramatic that happened. It was when Robert Carlyle does a self-parody of this already campy signature pose he does in like every episode. And at that moment, it was like his character sort of gave up on being campy. And it looks like the actor is just giving up too. My biggest problem with the show is that it's too conventional for its own good. It has plenty of chances to do something new and meaningful, but at the end of the day, it's an ABC production. They want to play it safe. They want to make it familiar and family friendly. So you can introduce really cool things like adoptive families being at the focus of the audience or guys in eyeliner. But time and time again, the mouse likes to rear in its ugly head and promote the superiority of biological families and the idea of guys wearing eyeliner is only for villains. And when in doubt, you can always depend on a flashback. Dear God, all the flashbacks in this show. It's overwhelming. A little bit about the production of the show. It was created by Adam Hurwitz and Edward Kitsis, both known for their work on Lost and the memorable Tron Legacy. Before Once Upon a Time, they did work on a TV adaptation of Birds of Prey, which I've never seen, but I want to try and find it. I love Gail Simone, and I love lady superheroes, and I'm kind of curious about if any of the inspiration for some of the characters or clothes in Once Upon a Time were carried over from Birds of Prey. If I end up watching that anytime soon, I'll have to get back to you and let you know about that. The show itself, Once Upon a Time, ran from October 2011 through May 2018, just a little over a year ago, and was primarily filmed in Vancouver. Now, I got this off the Wikipedia page, but based on what this is saying, Hurwitz and Kitsis wanted the show to have a hopeful feel to it, which is a departure from Lost's feeling of redemption. And having watched the show before, my opinion might change whenever I rewatch it, but having seen it before, I think they missed the mark. It's sort of a collection of redemption stories turned sappy. That's what Once Upon a Time is. It's very sappy redemption stories. I sort of joked about the flashbacks earlier, but it turns into a really lazy excuse for character development and padding throughout these episodes. Season 1, it works really well, especially since there is a disconnect between who the characters were before they were transported to Storybrooke and who they became afterwards, and they all get amnesia. And before you say anything, yes, Storybrooke is a terrible, god-awful name for a town, but the show thrives on whimsy, so I'm going to let it slide this once. I say that now, but I'm probably going to be making fun of that like every other episode. After season 1, though, it goes downhill pretty fast. For one thing, it goes from being about fairy tales to very transparently being about using Disney properties in general. I'll definitely rant about this if we get to talking about it, but Mulan makes an appearance. Mulan is based on a real person, guys, not a myth. But just because the mouse owns Mulan, the writers are probably like, sure, let's just throw her in there, see what happens. Anyway. Oh, the other thing that happens is that the show relies way too much on classic narrative devices and the devices it creates for itself. When I watched this the first time around, I could almost always tell when the writers were having problems figuring out what to do next in the show. Because when one story ended, when one plot ended, they would do one of these three things. They would either give a random person a flashback to have them have a redemption story in the present day time in Storybrooke. Not even just like the main characters, but if they would get bored, they would have, somebody from the diner all of a sudden has a little bit more significance to whenever they were living in the fairy tale land. So, you know what? Let's just write this in here. Let's see what happens. And again, there's a good reason for that to happen in the first season, but not so much later on. Now, if they ran out of characters to give flashbacks to, that's okay. Because the second thing that they would do, if they ran out of any material, would be to introduce a new character. And this is pretty hit or miss for me. I have to admit that when I saw Robert Carlyle's character for the first time, and you figure out, not who he is in Storybrooke, but who he was before, that particular arc I was actually really surprised with. I was pleasantly surprised by it. I thought it was pretty creative. But there comes a bunch of other character reveals that are either too obvious or are too silly. And again, this is supposed to be a whimsical show, ABC production, so I can't be too mad about it, but even by its own merit, the silliness can get pretty trite. And with every new character, there would be another goddamn flashback. Of course there would be. Maybe not as soon as the character was introduced, but don't worry, it happens at some point. And if all else fails, they could always do one other thing. And that is debate if the character Regina is really evil or really good. Poor Regina. I'm not a fan of one-dimensional villains, but the show had an opportunity to make her a more fleshed out villain than what she really was. And that train left very, very early on in this show's build-up. In the first season, there's a climax in the first season. In my opinion, it was the one and only time they could have done something to solidify her redemption arc, and they completely waste that opportunity. And she has a lot of different flashbacks too. Like they try to do this thing after the redemption boat passes, and then they keep going back and forth with Regina having flashbacks to when she experienced something traumatic in the fairy tale world, or someone betrayed her, or it's something like that, something stupid like that to make you feel sympathy for her. But all it ends up doing is making her look like a brooding, no one understands me emo soccer mom, and she just wants to speak to the manager all the time. I really won't go into spoilers about specifics right now, but when the time comes, I'll make sure that I post maybe like a little bit more of a heavier rant in the For Those at Home page. And that reminds me, I love talking, but sometimes we don't always have the means to get into lore deeply, or sometimes we want to post links to sources or interviews. Sometimes I just want to post GIFs and fan art. So for those at home who want to learn more or enjoy more silliness from me and Amanda, please feel free to check out our websites For Those at Home blog. I'll post updates on Twitter. So either way, there's always more to discuss, and we don't want to leave you out of the discussion. So for those at home now, I'm going to post a link from an interview with Bill Willingham of Fables, the writer of Fables. I love the graphic novels so much, and it was really easy for folks to make comparisons between Fables and Once Upon a Time when it first came out. The interview is from December 2011 from CBR.com. This was in Once Upon a Time's infancy. Bill's actually pretty chill about the production, and as a Fables fan myself, even though I was able to make some connections, I wasn't too worried about watching Once Upon a Time and there being any kind of like copyright issues, or at the very least, I knew ABC wasn't going to include a character that got powers from abortion clinics. Fables got dark, Once Upon a Time had a dimmer switch. And either way, I like Bill's input on the show, and for anybody who's a fan of Fables or a fan of Once Upon a Time, you should check it out. Well, I guess all I have to do now is get in touch with my buddy and watch some syndicated television. That is it for this episode, for our first little introduction episode. Thank you so much for listening. I'm going to post a link to our Twitter, our Patreon, and our website for Dreadful Pennies Productions in the descriptions. All the music used in our program is compliments of icon8.com, listed as well. Once Upon a Time is an ABC's Productions. I've been your host, Sam Logsdon, and remember, it might not be the end, it might not be happy, but you're always invited to this party. Take care.